There's more than enough room here for everyone, my sister-in-law announced, spreading her arms like she was presenting me with a renovation she'd done as a favor rather than something she'd done to me without permission. You travel 11 months out of the year. You were never actually using that space for anything that mattered. Behind her, two contractors I had never seen in my life were pulling custom shelving off the wall of my basement studio. Not generic shelving from a hardware store. Custom white oak units I had commissioned from a woodworker in East Nashville after 6 months of planning, built specifically to hold large format camera backs, archival film boxes organized by year and client, and the kind of precision lighting equipment that does not survive being casually relocated. 3 of my 4 archive bins had been moved to the floor. One had a crack running across the lid. My Hasselblad was not where I had left it. I had been in Portland for 9 days, a commercial photography conference I attend every year, the kind with workshop access and portfolio reviews that book out 18 months in advance. My return flight was scheduled for Saturday. It was Wednesday afternoon. My connection through Denver had been overbooked, and the airline had rerouted me through Salt Lake City and gotten me home 2.5 days ahead of schedule. I had thought about texting my brother to let him know I'd be back early. I had decided against it. That decision, as it turned out, was the only lucky thing that happened to me that week. Something felt wrong before I even got my key out. The rideshare had barely stopped when I noticed the moving truck. Not a cargo van, not a U-Haul, an actual full-size moving truck parked halfway onto my lawn with the back doors open, and maybe a third of the space still holding furniture I recognized as belonging to my brother and his family, which meant most of it was already inside. My front door was unlocked. I stood in the entryway for a few seconds before I could fully process what I was seeing. Their shoes in a pile by the door, his, hers, and the 2 kids' sneakers lined up like they had always belonged there. A sippy cup on my kitchen counter. A framed family photo I had never seen before leaning against the wall where I keep a particular exhibition print I made in Iceland 2 winters ago. The light across the glacier at 4 in the morning, one of the most technically difficult shots I have ever pulled off. The sippy cup was a few inches from the edge of the counter, and I remember thinking very clearly that it was going to fall. From the basement came the sound of a drill. I set my carry-on at the bottom of the stairs and went down. The studio I had built in that basement had taken 2 years and a little over $40,000. That number sounds significant until you understand what it represents. I am a commercial photographer. My clients pay me to produce images in controlled environments. Product work, editorial portraiture, catalog shoots. The baseline for that kind of work is consistent, manageable light, and the baseline for consistent, manageable light is a purpose-built space. I had done the ceiling myself, the way the track lighting was hung, the placement of the power drops, the custom-built storage, the ventilation system that keeps humidity stable year-round for the film archives. Every decision in that room was the result of something I had learned by working in spaces that didn't have those things and understanding exactly what the absence cost me. That studio was not a hobby room. It was the infrastructure of how I earned my living, and I had designed every inch of it. My sister-in-law was standing in the middle of it, directing a contractor where to start on the second wall. She didn't flinch when she saw me. That's the detail I keep coming back to. I had surprised her. She couldn't have known my flight had been rerouted, and yet she looked at me with the expression of someone who had already worked out what they were going to say and was mildly inconvenienced by the timing. She adjusted her posture and delivered her line about there being enough room for everyone. "Where is my Hasselblad?" I said. It was not a question. She waved toward the garage. "We moved your camera equipment so the kids would have..." "Stop working, please." I said it to the contractors, not to her. "Both of you." The younger contractor set his drill down immediately. The older one followed after a second. They looked at each other and then at the floor. "She's the homeowner," the younger one said quietly, to no one in particular. "I am the homeowner," I confirmed. "This work order was not authorized by me. Please set your tools down and don't touch anything else." My sister-in-law stepped forward. "You're overreacting. We needed a temporary place to stay while our house is under contract, and your brother talked to your mother, and she said, 'My mother does not own this property. She has a key.' A key I gave her for emergencies when I had surgery 3 years ago and asked her to return afterward. I looked at the wall, at the maple shelving units that were now partially demolished, the brackets still in the drywall with no unit attached. At the cable management channel that had been pried off and was sitting in pieces on the floor. Where is my film archive? There was a pause that told me everything. The bins are in the corner. The bins are on the floor with a cracked lid. Footsteps on the stairs. My brother appeared in the doorway, holding his youngest on his hip. He took in the scene, and his face did something complicated. Not guilt exactly, more like the expression of a person who had been hoping to delay this particular conversation until it somehow resolved itself. "Hey," he said, "you're back early." I asked him directly how they had gotten in. He told me our mother had given them the key. He said it was temporary. A few weeks, maybe 2 months. The house sale was supposed to close by now, and everything had just taken longer than expected, and the apartment they'd been renting month to month had already been leased to someone else. He said he had tried to call me twice. He said he didn't think I'd mind. I waited until he was done. Then I told him I needed him to collect his family, take the children upstairs, and leave my property, that I was going to call the police. My sister-in-law made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a scoff. "You are not going to call the police on your own brother." I was already dialing. She stopped making the sound. I told the dispatcher my address, that I had returned to my property to find unauthorized occupants who were refusing to leave, and that there was an ongoing unauthorized renovation of the space. I said there was no physical threat. I said I needed an officer present for the vacating of the premises. The dispatcher said someone would be there within 15 minutes. My brother said my name once in a tone that was meant to be a warning. I looked at him steadily until he looked away. The police arrived in 14 minutes. 2 officers. I met them at the door with my ID and pulled up my property deed on my phone before they could ask. One officer went to speak with my brother and sister-in-law. The other stayed with me and asked a few questions about the timeline. From the basement, I could hear my sister-in-law explaining, at length, that my mother had given permission, that it was a family matter, that I was being disproportionate. The officer listening to her was very calm and very patient. After a few minutes, he came back and told me what she'd said about my mother's key. "My mother doesn't have ownership interest in the property," I said. "I own it. I didn't authorize access or modification." They were asked to leave. My sister-in-law took her time, making sure her exit communicated as much contempt as possible. My brother carried the kids out without making eye contact with me. I stood in the front door and watched until their car and the moving truck were both gone, and then I closed the door and locked it with the locks that would be replaced within the hour. The garage was worse than I had expected. My Hasselblad was in its case and intact, which was the first thing I checked. My Profoto strobes were stacked without padding. One head visibly cracked at the housing in a way that would affect the seal around the flash tube. My light stands had been collapsed and shoved against the wall, one with a bent center column. And my film archive, 8 years of developed negatives organized by year and client, had been moved in 4 plastic bins, one of which had a cracked lid that had apparently been cracked before it was moved because there was moisture damage on 2 full boxes inside. Developed negatives that I had shot on location in winter weather and driven home and processed in a controlled environment and stored at a specific humidity level for years. Warped, unsalvageable. I photographed everything before I touched it. I went back into the studio and photographed every inch of that too. I sent all of it, time-stamped, to my homeowner's insurance company and opened a claim. The claims representative was the first person that day who sounded genuinely concerned about what had happened to me rather than what the situation was going to mean for someone else. She told me not to move anything further, to get at least 2 contractor estimates for restoration, and to document the equipment damage with purchase records and repair assessments. She also explained, and this I hadn't known to expect, that my policy covered third-party property damage and that the insurance company could pursue the responsible parties directly for reimbursement. In plain terms, they would go after my brother and sister-in-law for the money. The full weight of a liability claim, not a family argument. I called the locksmith next. Then I sat down on the floor of the ruined studio, on the concrete that used to be under my epoxy coating before someone had apparently pulled it up near the drain, and I stayed there for a while. I don't have a good way to describe what that felt like except to say it was not the clean burn of anger anymore. Anger had gotten me through the previous 2 hours, through the confrontation and the phone call, and watching my family load themselves back into their truck. What was left after that was something older and quieter. I had given my mother that key because I was afraid after surgery, because I had woken up from anesthesia in a hospital room alone, and called her and she had come. I had trusted that the key meant something, that being the person she came to meant something, and she had handed it to my brother without asking me, and he had handed it to his wife, and his wife had hired contractors. The trust had not dissolved in a moment. It had been repurposed a long time ago, and I was only now seeing what it had been used for. I was still sitting on the floor when Odessa got there. She'd driven directly from her office when I called, 40 minutes across the city, and she walked through the studio without saying anything for a long time. Then she sat down next to me on the concrete and we waited together for the locksmith. When he arrived and started working, Odessa made tea in my kitchen and brought it down, and we sat with the sound of the locks being changed, one door at a time, as the anchor of the whole evening. When it was done and I was holding the new keys, she looked at me with the expression she uses when she is choosing her words carefully. "Attorney in the morning," she said. "Already scheduled," I said. My attorney specializes in property law. I had used her when I bought the townhouse and trusted her judgment entirely. When I reached her the next morning and walked through the timeline, the key, the truck, the contractors, the equipment, she listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The question isn't whether they're family," she said. "The question is whether they knew the property wasn't theirs to modify. And they did know. That's not a gray area." She told me to file a formal police report, separate from the welfare call the night before. She told me to send her all 3 contractor estimates when I had them. She told me that any calls or messages from my brother or sister-in-law should be forwarded to her without response. I filed the police report that afternoon. The detective who took it down was methodical. He went through the photos carefully. He asked whether I had documentation of the equipment's value, serial numbers, purchase receipts, insurance records. I did, all of it in a cloud folder I maintain for exactly that reason. He asked whether the contractors who had been on the property would be willing to speak to the nature of the work order they'd received. I said I thought at least one of them would, given how quickly they had stopped working when I asked. Outside the station, I sat in my car for a few minutes with my hands on the wheel. 14 missed calls on my phone. My mother, my brother, my sister-in-law from 2 different numbers, my father. I listened to none of them. I forwarded the voicemails to my attorney with a note that said handle as you see fit, and then I drove home. The calls from relatives I didn't know had been told about the situation started 2 days later. A cousin who said I was breaking up the family. An uncle who said I'd always been difficult. My mother left a voicemail that lasted 4 minutes in which she cried for approximately 90 seconds before pivoting to a list of things she had done for me over the years. I let my attorney handle all of it. My brother's attorney, a family friend who practiced estate law, not property litigation, contacted my attorney on day 4 and asked whether I would drop the matter if they agreed to cover professional cleaning costs. My attorney responded with the full scope: $46,000 in studio restoration, over $8,000 in equipment damage and replacement, legal fees approaching $4,000, and an insurance subrogation claim already in progress. She told him we were prepared to proceed to court if necessary. I was eating lunch when my phone rang with my sister-in-law's number. I answered and put it on speaker without saying anything. "Do you understand what this has done?" Her voice was controlled in the way that something is controlled right before it stops being controlled. A detective called my husband's office. His direct supervisor knows that there's an active police investigation involving him. "Do you know what that does to someone professionally? Do you understand the position you've put our family in?" I let her finish. "I understand that entering private property without authorization and hiring contractors to modify it without the owner's consent has legal consequences," I said. "That's true regardless of the relationship. We had nowhere else to go. That's not something I'm responsible for. Your mother doesn't own my property, doesn't have the legal authority to grant access to it. You knew that." A long silence. When she spoke again, the controlled quality was gone and she just sounded tired. "What is it going to take?" she asked. "Talk to your attorney," I said. "He'll be in touch with mine." I ended the call and sat with the quiet for a moment. Then I finished my lunch. The settlement was finalized 11 days later. $46,000 towards studio restoration, paid to my contractor directly upon completion. $8,400 for equipment, the cracked Profoto head, the bent light stand, the destroyed film archive, verified by repair estimates and replacement costs. Legal fees in full. A written restriction prohibiting my brother, his wife, or their children from entering my property for any reason without my written invitation in advance, with clear legal consequence for violation. And the clause their attorney fought longest. A written acknowledgement that the entry was unauthorized and the modification was carried out without my consent. I did not move on that last clause they signed. My insurance company's subrogation process recovered a portion of the damages on the back end. My attorney's invoice was paid in full from the settlement, which I had insisted on as a term. When all the numbers were settled, the restoration began. 6 weeks after that, I ran into my aunt at the farmer's market near her house, my father's sister, the one who has a print of mine in her dining room and has had it there for 7 years. She hugged me before she said anything. That told me what kind of conversation it was going to be. My brother and his family were in a rental 2-bedroom out by the county line. The house sale had collapsed. She said he was okay, the kids were okay, but that things were hard. She said my sister-in-law wasn't speaking to certain people. She said my mother was still upset. She said all of this with the careful kindness of someone who loves both sides of a thing and has stopped trying to fix it. Tell him the kids are welcome to a print when they're old enough to want one, I said, and I meant it, which surprised me slightly. My aunt held my hand for a second and then let go, and we both went back to our respective errands. The studio was finished on a Thursday. The contractor had outdone himself. The new shelving was white oak, cleaner lines than the original maple, better cable management integrated into the build, new track lighting, a dehumidifier system built into the ventilation, a keypad lock on the basement door with a code I have given to exactly one person, and she already knows when to use it and when not to. The first time I shot in the finished studio, I set up a still life just to see the light. A bowl of oranges and a length of linen, nothing significant, just a reason to be in the space with a camera and see what it felt like. The light off the white oak shelving was warm in a way the maple hadn't been. I shot about 40 frames, and then I sat down and looked at them on my laptop and understood that I had gotten something back that I hadn't known I was missing until I had it again. Odessa came over that night. I had a bottle of wine I'd been saving for an occasion I couldn't name when I bought it, but I understood now what it had been waiting for. We sat in the studio in the good chairs, and she raised her glass. "To the space," she said. "To the space." She looked around at the walls, the new shelving, the light, and then at me with the expression she uses when she's going to say the true thing instead of the comfortable thing. "You know what you actually got back that isn't on any invoice?" I waited. "You know that nobody is getting in here unless you say so." She shrugged simply. "You knew it before, technically. Now you know it all the way down." I thought about that later after she left, standing alone in the studio in the quiet that I had rebuilt into something that actually held. The keypad on the door, the cameras at the entry points, the locks that only I held keys to. None of those things came from fear. They came from the decision I had made on a concrete floor weeks ago that the terms on which I lived in my own home were mine to set and mine alone, and that I was done apologizing for that. I am 31 years old. I built something with my own hands and my own money and my own years of work, and I defended it the only way that actually means anything. Not with a raised voice, not with a threat that I walked back, but with paperwork and patience and the willingness to let every consequence land exactly where it belonged. This is my studio, this is my house, and I am not going anywhere.